Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. We asked the Ouija board when we would die. Now it's counting down. I've always been skeptical about supernatural stuff. Ghosts, demons, Ouija boards. It's all just stories to me. You hear people talk about it like it's real, but I figured most of them were just trying to scare themselves for fun, or, sell a good ghost story. That said, there's a difference between hearing creepy stories and actually experiencing something that shakes you to your core. This whole mess started one Friday night. It was me, my girlfriend Alyssa, my buddy Ryan, and his girlfriend Megan. We were all hanging out at Ryan's place because his parents were out of town. The night had started off pretty chill. Pizza, drinks, some video games, typical weekend hangout stuff. Eventually, though, we got bored. Alyssa, always the one with weird ideas, suggested we mess around with a Ouija board. "I have one in my car," she said, like it was no big deal. Who just keeps a Ouija board in their car? But that's Alyssa for you. She's into all the spooky, witchy stuff. Crystals, tarot cards, you name it. Ryan was immediately down, because, of course, he's the type of guy who'd do anything to keep the party going. Megan wasn't so sure, though. "Isn't that, dangerous? What if we bring something into the house?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. Ryan laughed it off, saying, "Come on, Meg, it's just a game. We'll ask it a few dumb questions, scare ourselves, and call it a night. What's the worst that could happen?" I wasn't really thrilled about the idea, but at the same time, I didn't want to be the killjoy in the group. So, we grabbed some candles, turned off the lights, and set up in Ryan's living room. Alyssa pulled the board out of her bag. It was this old wooden one, the kind that looked way too legit to be sold in a toy store. Now, I'll admit, the vibe in the room shifted as soon as we set it up. The candles flickering, the shadows on the walls. It started to feel off. But again, I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me. The whole Ouija thing is just a bunch of nonsense, right? So, there we were, sitting in a circle around this ancient-looking board, our fingers resting lightly on the planchette. Alyssa took charge, of course. "Is there anyone here who wants to communicate with us?" she asked, trying to sound all serious, but I could see the smirk on her face. Ryan made a fake spooky noise, which earned him a punch from Megan. Nothing happened. The planchette didn't move, and we all kind of laughed it off. But then Alyssa, being the curious type, asked a question that changed everything. "When will we die?" I thought it was a dumb question, honestly. I even joked, "Probably from boredom if this thing doesn't start working." But then, the planchette moved. Slowly. At first, I thought one of them was messing with us, pushing it on purpose. But as it dragged itself across the board, I realized no one was laughing. No one was saying anything. The room got colder, noticeably colder. And the planchette stopped at a single number. We all sat there staring at it for a minute, not sure what to do or say. I broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Okay, who's doing that? Seriously?" Everyone swore they weren't. And the weird part, I actually believed them. Then Alyssa, always the bold one, whispered, "What's the 10 mean? Is it 10 days? 10 years?" Before anyone could answer, the planchette started moving again, this time quicker. It spelled out DAYS, 10 days. We all pulled our hands back from the planchette at the same time, like it was burning hot. I could feel my heart racing. Alyssa tried to laugh it off, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Okay, that was weird, but someone's pushing it, right?" she asked, looking around at the rest of us. Ryan shook his head. Megan looked like she was about to cry. I wasn't sure what to believe. I stood up. "All right, I'm out. That's enough of that. Let's just, I don't know, watch a movie or something." But no one moved. No one said a word. We just sat there in that cold, dark room, staring at the board like it had somehow come alive. After what felt like forever, Alyssa shrugged. It's probably just a coincidence, guys. Besides, we don't even know what the 10 days thing means. We'll all be fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Really wrong. Author's note. This was just the start of something way bigger than any of us could have imagined. We all thought it was a joke, but as you'll find out in part 2, the countdown wasn't just random. If you think you'd handle it better, just wait until I tell you what happened next. I wish I could tell you that we all just laughed it off and moved on with our night, but things got weirder. After the whole 10 days thing, the mood was ruined. No one wanted to admit they were freaked out, but you could feel it in the air. We tried to act normal. Ryan put on some dumb comedy on Netflix to lighten the mood, but no one was really paying attention. Everyone kept sneaking glances at the clock or checking their phones. I caught myself doing it too, like I was already counting down in my head. I kept telling myself it was just a stupid game, but that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. And I wasn't the only one. Megan was unusually quiet, staring at her phone the whole time. Alyssa was trying to act like nothing bothered her, but she kept fidgeting, glancing over at the Ouija board like it might start moving on its own. Ryan was the only one trying to keep the vibe up, but even he was more distracted than usual. Eventually, Megan couldn't take it anymore and said she was feeling sick. She wanted to leave. I don't blame her. After what had just happened, the idea of going home and curling up in my own bed sounded pretty good to me too. Alyssa offered to drive her back, but Megan refused. "I don't want to be alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We all ended up leaving together. Ryan didn't want to be stuck at his place alone either. We walked out into the cold night, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket and makes you feel exposed. Something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced back at Ryan's house before getting into the car, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching us through the windows. But there was nothing, just darkness. The next few days were weird. Nothing huge happened, but it was like little things started piling up, each one making that sinking feeling worse. It started the next morning. I woke up at exactly 7:10 a.m., which wouldn't have been strange except my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. When I grabbed it, I saw I had a notification. One of those daily reminder apps I don't even remember downloading. The message: 9 days left. I thought it was some glitch, maybe an old app I forgot about, so I deleted it. No big deal, right? I figured someone had set it up as a prank. But as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something else. My reflection in the mirror looked off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like my eyes were slightly different, like they didn't belong to me. I actually leaned in closer, staring at my own face until the steam from the hot water fogged the glass. It's hard to explain, but I felt watched, even in my own house. That sense of someone or something keeping track of me. I tried to shake it off, but the rest of the day just felt wrong. Alyssa texted me around noon, saying she couldn't stop thinking about the Ouija board. She asked if I had gotten any weird messages, but I didn't tell her about the countdown notification. Didn't want to freak her out more than she already was. Later that night, Alyssa and I were supposed to meet up with Ryan and Megan to grab dinner, but Megan backed out last minute. She texted Ryan that she hadn't slept at all the night before. Said she kept hearing tapping sounds on her window. Her place is on the second floor, by the way. There's nothing outside her window but air. Ryan brushed it off. Said Megan was probably just paranoid. But I knew Megan. She wasn't the type to make stuff up or scare easy. If she said she heard something, I believed her. That night, when I got back home, things escalated. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard this faint sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the window, but it didn't stop. It was this slow, steady tapping sound, almost like someone was outside my window too. I live on the first floor, so I thought maybe it was a tree branch, but when I checked, there was nothing there. No branches, no wind, nothing that could have made that noise. I stood there, staring out into the dark, half expecting something to jump out at me. But again, just emptiness. I went back to bed, but the tapping started again, this time louder, closer. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump. It was another notification. This time, no app, no sender, just a message on the lock screen that read, 8 days left. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it was a joke. Ryan was probably messing with me, or maybe Alyssa had somehow hacked into my phone as a prank. But deep down, I knew neither of them would go this far. It felt too real. I blocked the number, but when I closed my eyes, all I could hear was the steady tap, tap, tap coming from the window. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called Ryan. Before I could even bring up the tapping, he interrupted me. "Dude, Megan's gone." I froze. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "She left her place this morning without telling anyone. No note. Nothing. Her phone's off. I don't know what to do, man." We met up at Ryan's place, and he was a wreck. He hadn't gotten any creepy messages like I had, but apparently Megan had been acting really strange the last couple of days. She kept saying something was following her, and that she felt like time was running out. Alyssa showed up not long after, looking just as freaked out as the rest of us. We tried calling Megan again and again, but it always went straight to voicemail. We were all on edge, terrified, but not saying it out loud. But I couldn't stop thinking about that number. 8 days. Part 2. The countdown begins. I wish I could tell you that we all just laughed it off and moved on with our night, but things got weirder. After the whole 10 days thing, the mood was ruined. No one wanted to admit they were freaked out, but you could feel it in the air. We tried to act normal. Ryan put on some dumb comedy on Netflix to lighten the mood. But no one was really paying attention. Everyone kept sneaking glances at the clock or checking their phones. I caught myself doing it too, like I was already counting down in my head. I kept telling myself it was just a stupid game, but that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. And I wasn't the only one. Megan was unusually quiet, staring at her phone the whole time. Alyssa was trying to act like nothing bothered her, but she kept fidgeting, glancing over at the Ouija board like it might start moving on its own. Ryan was the only one trying to keep the vibe up, but even he was more distracted than usual. Eventually, Megan couldn't take it anymore and said she was feeling sick. She wanted to leave. I don't blame her. After what had just happened, the idea of going home and curling up in my own bed sounded pretty good to me too. Alyssa offered to drive her back, but Megan refused. "I don't want to be alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We all ended up leaving together. Ryan didn't want to be stuck at his place alone either. We walked out into the cold night, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket and makes you feel exposed. Something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced back at Ryan's house before getting into the car, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching us through the windows. But there was nothing, just darkness. The next few days were weird. Nothing huge happened, but it was like little things started piling up, each one making that sinking feeling worse. It started the next morning. I woke up at exactly 7:10 a.m., which wouldn't have been strange except my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. When I grabbed it, I saw I had a notification. One of those daily reminder apps I don't even remember downloading. The message. 9 days left. I thought it was some glitch, maybe an old app I forgot about, so I deleted it. No big deal, right? I figured someone had set it up as a prank. But as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something else. My reflection in the mirror looked off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like my eyes were slightly different, like they didn't belong to me. I actually leaned in closer, staring at my own face until the steam from the hot water fogged the glass. It's hard to explain, but I felt watched, even in my own house. That sense of someone or something keeping track of me. I tried to shake it off, but the rest of the day just felt wrong. Alyssa texted me around noon saying she couldn't stop thinking about the Ouija board. She asked if I had gotten any weird messages, but I didn't tell her about the countdown notification. Didn't want to freak her out more than she already was. Later that night, Alyssa and I were supposed to meet up with Ryan and Megan to grab dinner, but Megan backed out last minute. She texted Ryan that she hadn't slept at all the night before, said she kept hearing tapping sounds on her window. Her place is on the second floor, by the way. There's nothing outside her window but air. Ryan brushed it off, said Megan was probably just paranoid. But I knew Megan. She wasn't the type to make stuff up or scare easy. If she said she heard something, I believed her. That night, when I got back home, things escalated. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard this faint sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the window, but it didn't stop. It was this slow, steady tapping sound, almost like someone was outside my window too. I live on the first floor, so I thought maybe it was a tree branch, but when I checked, there was nothing there. No branches, no wind, nothing that could have made that noise. I stood there, staring out into the dark, half expecting something to jump out at me. But again, just emptiness. I went back to bed, but the tapping started again, this time louder, closer. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump. It was another notification. This time, no app, no sender. Just a message on the lock screen that read, 8 days left. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it was a joke. Ryan was probably messing with me. Or maybe Alyssa had somehow hacked into my phone as a prank. But deep down, I knew neither of them would go this far. It felt too real. I blocked the number, but when I closed my eyes, all I could hear was the steady tap, tap, tap coming from the window. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called Ryan. Before I could even bring up the tapping, he interrupted me. Dude, Megan's gone. I froze. Gone? What do you mean gone? She left her place this morning without telling anyone. No note, nothing. Her phone's off. I don't know what to do, man. We met up at Ryan's place, and he was a wreck. He hadn't gotten any creepy messages like I had, but apparently Megan had been acting really strange the last couple of days. She kept saying something was following her, and that she felt like time was running out. Alyssa showed up not long after, looking just as freaked out as the rest of us. We tried calling Megan again and again, but it always went straight to voicemail. We were all on edge, terrified, but not saying it out loud. But I couldn't stop thinking about that number. 8 days. To be continued. Author's note. Now things were really starting to spiral. I thought the tapping was in my head, but Megan disappearing? That was real. We had no idea what was happening, but that countdown felt like a clock ticking over all of us. I'll explain what happened next in part 3. Trust me, it only gets worse from here. By the time we hit day 7, the group was unraveling. Megan was still missing, and no one had heard from her. Her parents were freaking out, calling Ryan constantly, asking if he had any leads. He didn't have any answers for them, or for himself. He looked exhausted, bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days, which, to be fair, he hadn't. None of us had. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that damn tapping. It wasn't just my window anymore, it was everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, like something was slowly closing in. My phone had stopped buzzing with countdown messages, but honestly, that just made things worse. The silence made me feel like something was building up, just waiting to hit. We tried to keep it together. We even went to the police to report Megan missing. I thought, maybe if we get the authorities involved, they'll find her, and this whole thing will end. But the cops didn't take us seriously. They kept saying things like, it's not unusual for young adults to go off the grid for a few days, and she probably just needed some space. I wanted to scream at them. This wasn't Megan. She wouldn't just disappear like that. Then came the weird part, the part I haven't told anyone, not even Ryan or Alyssa. After the police brushed us off, I drove home alone. It was late, around 1 a.m., and the streets were empty. My headlights barely cut through the fog that had rolled in, making everything look surreal, like I was driving through some dreamscape. I tried to keep calm, but the tapping noise had started again, echoing in the back of my mind. As I turned down my street, I saw something. Someone, standing at the corner. At first, I thought it was just a random person, but as I got closer, my heart started pounding. It was Megan. She was just standing there, staring blankly ahead, not moving. Her clothes were the same ones she'd been wearing the last time I saw her, but they were dirty, like she'd been walking around for days without stopping. My headlights lit her up as I slowed the car, and I swear she didn't even blink. I rolled down the window and shouted, "Megan! Megan, are you okay?" But she didn't react. It was like she didn't even hear me. I got out of the car, ready to run over and help her. But as soon as I stepped onto the street, she turned around and walked into the fog. I sprinted after her, but the fog was so thick I could barely see 2 feet in front of me. I called her name again and again, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just listening to the sound of my own breathing, half expecting her to jump out at me from the mist. But she didn't. Eventually I gave up and went home, feeling more confused and scared than ever. When I got inside, I checked my phone. No new messages, no countdown, just silence. I was too rattled to sleep, so I sat up in bed, staring at the Ouija board that Alyssa had left behind on my dresser. For a moment, I considered asking it what the hell was going on, but I didn't. I didn't want to know. The next day, I called Ryan and told him what happened. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but he didn't seem as surprised as I expected. "I saw her too," he admitted, sounding like he was on the verge of breaking down. "I thought I was losing my mind. She was outside my house last night, just standing there. I tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. I was too freaked out to go after her. That's when I knew we were all in this. It wasn't just a coincidence. Whatever we'd messed with that night, whatever we'd invited, it wasn't done with us." Day 6 came, and that's when Alyssa started losing it. She called me early in the morning, her voice shaking. "I keep seeing it," she said. "I don't know what it is, but it's watching me. Every time I turn around, I see something out of the corner of my eye. But when I look, it's gone. I can't take it anymore." I didn't know what to say to her. I was seeing things too. Figures in the dark, shadows that didn't belong to anything, movement in the corners of my vision. I hadn't told her about Megan on the street yet. I didn't want to make it worse. By day 5, Ryan stopped answering his phone. I figured he just needed space, but Alyssa was freaking out. She hadn't heard from him either, so we decided to head over to his place. His car was in the driveway, so we knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Alyssa was about to suggest breaking in when I noticed something strange. The windows. Every single one of them had been blacked out. Not just the curtains drawn, but blacked out, like someone had taped garbage bags or something over them. "Alyssa, what the hell is this?" I asked, pointing at the windows. She just shook her head, biting her lip. "We need to get in there." We found an open window around the back and climbed in. The house was dark, the air inside stale, like it hadn't been lived in for days. It was dead silent. No TV, no music, just the sound of our footsteps echoing through the hall. We searched the whole house but couldn't find Ryan anywhere. His phone was on the kitchen counter, but there was no sign of him. Alyssa was starting to panic, pacing around, checking the same rooms over and over. I didn't blame her. The whole place felt wrong, like it wasn't even Ryan's house anymore, like we weren't supposed to be there. Then, in the living room, I found it, the Ouija board. It was sitting on the coffee table, with the planchette resting in the middle. There was something scratched into the wood around the board, like someone had been clawing at it in desperation. I leaned in closer and saw what was carved into the table. One word, DAYS. I pulled Alyssa over to show her, and she just stared at it, wide-eyed. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now." We bolted out of there, not even bothering to close the window behind us. As we drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Ryan standing in the driveway, just like Megan had been. But there was nothing. That night, I lay in bed, staring at my phone, waiting for the next message. I knew it was coming. And sure enough, at exactly midnight, it buzzed. 5 days left. Author's note. Ryan's house wasn't what we expected. Whatever we let in was getting stronger, and the countdown was getting shorter. Part 4 is where everything really starts to fall apart. If you think what's happened so far is bad, trust me, it only gets worse from here. By the time we hit day 4, things had gone from bad to worse. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours in days, and neither had Alyssa. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake up to that relentless tapping sound, or worse. I'd hear whispers, too faint to understand but too real to ignore. It was like the walls themselves were breathing, alive with something just out of sight. And Ryan? Still missing. I didn't want to admit it out loud, but I had this gnawing feeling that whatever was happening to us had gotten him first. Maybe that's why he blacked out the windows. Maybe he'd seen something we weren't supposed to see, and it had consumed him. I kept thinking back to that Ouija board, the scratches around it, the word days carved into the wood. It felt like every minute we stayed silent, the thing was crawling closer. Alyssa didn't want to be alone anymore, so she started staying over at my place. We thought maybe if we stuck together, we'd be safer. Safety in numbers, right? Except it didn't feel that way. My apartment, once a place where I could escape, now felt like a trap. The air was thick, like every breath I took was being monitored, watched. The next night, Alyssa and I were sitting in my living room, trying to distract ourselves with mindless TV. But neither of us was watching. We were both waiting for the next sign, the next weird thing to happen. It wasn't a question of if, but when. Around midnight, the power flickered. Once, twice, and then went out completely. Alyssa immediately grabbed my arm. "It's starting again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I tried to calm her down, but deep down, I was just as terrified. We fumbled around in the dark until I found my phone and turned on the flashlight. That's when I noticed it. My phone screen had lit up with another message. No number, no app, just the same cryptic countdown. 4 days left. Alyssa's phone buzzed a second later. She looked down at it, her face pale, and then she showed me her screen. The same message. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, but what would that do? There was no escaping it, no deleting it. The countdown was always there, just ticking away, reminding us that time was running out. We spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, jumping at every little sound. The tapping returned around 3 a.m., but it wasn't coming from the window this time. It was inside, from the walls. It moved in slow, deliberate patterns, like something was tracing the inside of the house. Alyssa leaned in close to me, her voice shaking. "Do you think it's Ryan? Do you think he's gone?" I didn't know how to answer. Part of me didn't want to think about it, but I had to. "I don't know," I whispered back. "But I think whatever we let out that night, it's not finished with us yet." The next day, we tried to go about our lives as if nothing had happened, but it was impossible. The smallest things set us off. A car backfiring, the wind rustling through the trees, even the sound of my neighbor's footsteps in the hall. Everything felt like a threat, like reality was tearing at the seams. Day 3 rolled around, and I got another message. This time, though, it wasn't just the countdown. The message read, "Come and see." That was it. No explanation, no context, just those 3 words. It sent chills down my spine. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to find out. But of course, I didn't have a choice. The phone buzzed again. Same message. Then again, it wouldn't stop. Alyssa got the same thing. "Come and see." over and over like it was demanding we show up somewhere. But where? We tried ignoring it, but that night something happened that we couldn't ignore. It was around 2 a.m. when Alyssa shook me awake. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "Listen," she whispered. At first I didn't hear anything, but then there it was, a soft scratching sound coming from outside the apartment door. My heart dropped into my stomach. We both sat up, frozen, listening. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like someone was clawing at the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just the relentless scratching. Alyssa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We shouldn't open it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, but the door handle started rattling. I stood up, my legs shaking, and slowly approached the door. As I got closer, the scratching stopped. I waited, my hand hovering over the knob, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And then I heard it. A voice. "Megan?" It was faint, like it was coming from far away, but I recognized it instantly. It was Ryan. His voice was soft, desperate, like he was calling out from somewhere far off. "Help me," the voice whispered, and then the scratching started again. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. There was no way that was Ryan. It couldn't be. But hearing his voice made my blood run cold. Alyssa was already shaking her head, pleading with me not to open it. I didn't. I couldn't. We stayed locked in that room until morning, neither of us sleeping. By the time the sun came up, the scratching had stopped, but the fear hadn't. When day 2 arrived, we both got the same message again. "Come and see." This time, it was followed by an address. The message was clear. We were being summoned. It was Ryan's house. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in me screamed to stay away. But Alyssa insisted. "We have to know," she said. "We have to see what's there. We owe it to Ryan and Megan." Reluctantly, I agreed. We drove to Ryan's place in silence, the sky grey and overcast, like the world itself was mourning what was about to happen. When we arrived, the house looked exactly as we'd left it, dark, windows blacked out, the front door slightly ajar. We stepped inside, the air thick and musty, as if no one had been there for weeks. The house was eerily quiet, but the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. We made our way into the living room, and that's when I saw it. The Ouija board was still there, but this time, the planchette wasn't sitting in the middle. It was pointing directly at the number 1. "One day left," Alyssa whispered. And then we heard it, a voice, faint and distant, echoing from the basement. "Come and see." Alyssa and I exchanged a glance. We didn't want to go down there, but we knew we had no choice. The air felt colder as we descended the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the darkness. When we reached the bottom, we saw him. Ryan. He was sitting in the corner of the basement, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the Ouija board in front of him. His fingers were trembling as they moved the planchette, but it was clear he wasn't in control. It was moving on its own, dragging his hands along with it. And then he looked up at us, his voice hollow, barely a whisper. "It's almost time." Author's note: whatever we let out, it's coming for us. The countdown is almost over, and what we found in Ryan's basement is just the beginning of the end. Part 5 will take you to the final day, where everything comes crashing down. Hold on tight. This isn't over yet. When Ryan looked up at us, his eyes were hollow, like whatever was left of him had already checked out. He was pale, shivering, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was like he was slowly fading, being drained of life. The basement was freezing, colder than it should have been, and the darkness down there felt thick, like something was pressing in on us from all sides. "It's almost time," he whispered again, his voice barely a breath. The Ouija board lay in front of him, the planchette stuck on the number 1. One day left. Alyssa stepped back, her face pale, but I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor. It was like my brain couldn't process what was happening, what Ryan had become. He was barely the guy I knew anymore, just this shell of a person who'd been sitting in his own basement, waiting for something to take him. But what? "Ryan," I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on? What happened to you?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the board, his hands trembling. Then, slowly, he raised his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. "It's here," he said, barely above a whisper. "It's always been here, watching, waiting." Alyssa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to leave," she said, her voice breaking. "We need to get out of here now." But before we could move, Ryan spoke again, his voice sounding more like a low growl. "You can't leave. None of us can. It's too late." The basement suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, like they were reaching for us. Alyssa started backing toward the stairs, pulling me with her, but I couldn't take my eyes off Ryan. He was just sitting there, staring at us. But there was something wrong about his eyes, like he wasn't fully in control anymore. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out completely, plunging the basement into total darkness. I froze. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath shallow and quick. Alyssa's grip tightened on my arm as we stood there, blind, the silence around us deafening. But then, we heard it again. The tapping. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the windows or the walls. It was all around us, closing in. Slow, deliberate taps, like something was circling us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I managed to get the flashlight on, the dim beam cutting through the thick darkness. I aimed it at where Ryan had been sitting, but he was gone. The Ouija board lay on the floor, the planchette still on the number 1, but Ryan had vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. Alyssa whispered, "Where did he go?" "What?" Before she could finish, we both heard it. A voice, low and guttural, coming from behind us. "It's time." We spun around, and my flashlight beam landed on the staircase. There, standing at the top, was Megan. But it wasn't Megan. Not anymore. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark and sunken, her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. She stood there, motionless, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, like something had broken inside of her, but she didn't care. The light from my phone flickered across her face, and I realized with a jolt that her eyes weren't just dark, they were empty, hollow. She opened her mouth, and that same voice came out again. "It's time!" Alyssa screamed. I grabbed her hand, and without thinking, we bolted. We didn't look back. We scrambled up the stairs and out of the house, slamming the front door behind us. The cold night air hit us like a wall, but I didn't care. We just kept running. I didn't know where we were going, just that we needed to get away. The street was empty, but it didn't feel safe. I could still feel it, whatever it was, lurking just beyond the shadows, watching, waiting. We stopped running when we reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking, but I managed to unlock the doors. We both jumped in, slamming the doors behind us, and I started the engine. The headlights cut through the fog, and for a moment, it felt like we might be okay, like we might have escaped. But then my phone buzzed. I looked down, my heart sinking. It was another message. 0 days left. Alyssa's phone buzzed too. She didn't even have to check it. We both knew what it said. 0 days. Time was up. I started driving, not even sure where we were going, but the streets felt endless. The fog was thick, swallowing up the road in front of us, making everything look the same. We could have been driving in circles for all I knew. The tapping started again, faint at first, but growing louder. It wasn't coming from the car. It was inside my head, in my bones. The same pattern, over and over, like it was counting down to something. I glanced at Alyssa. She was staring straight ahead, her face pale, her lips moving, whispering something under her breath. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She didn't answer. She just kept whispering the same thing over and over. I leaned closer, trying to hear, and that's when I realized she was counting down. 3, 2, 1. The car screeched to a halt as I slammed on the brakes. The fog cleared for just a moment, and standing in the middle of the road, lit up by the headlights, was Ryan. He was just standing there, his back to us, his body still and stiff. I opened my mouth to call out, but before I could say anything, he turned around. And that's when I saw it. He wasn't alone. Behind him, towering over his slumped figure, was something. Too large and too twisted to be real. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its face contorted into a grotesque parody of a smile. Eyes black as night. It reached out for Ryan, and he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, waiting, accepting. I threw the car in reverse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. But as I looked back at Alyssa, I realized she wasn't moving. She wasn't counting anymore. Her eyes were wide, locked on the figure in the headlights, her mouth hanging open in silent terror. And then, just like that, she slumped forward. Gone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared, too numb to feel anything. The tapping stopped. My phone buzzed one last time. This time, the message was simple. It's done. I'm writing this now, but I know it won't matter. Time's up. I don't know how long I have left. Maybe hours, maybe minutes. But whatever it is, it's still out there, waiting. And soon, it'll come for me too. We played with a Ouija board on a live stream. Something entered the room, and now everyone watching is in danger. Okay, so I'm not usually the type to post on Reddit, but I really need to get this out there, and honestly, I don't know what else to do at this point. My name's Alex, and I've been streaming on Twitch for a couple of years now. Nothing crazy, just a bunch of random gameplay, some just chatting sessions, the usual stuff. But last week, something happened on stream, and it's been messing with my head ever since. I don't know if it was a prank, a hallucination, or something worse, but the fact that I'm not the only one freaked out makes me think there's more to this. So, let me rewind. I've got a couple of regulars in my chat. You know the type, people who pop in every stream, throw bits, chat, and make jokes. Over time, they've started suggesting random ideas for streams, and one of them, I'm still not sure who originally suggested it, thought it'd be hilarious if we did a Ouija board challenge. You know, the kind of thing people do for cheap scares, except it's just me, sitting in my room, talking to a piece of cardboard like an idiot. I laughed it off at first. I'm not superstitious or anything. I mean, I'm into horror movies and ghost stories like everyone else, but I didn't actually believe in any of that stuff. But the more I brushed it off, the more chat started egging me on. You know how it is. Once people in the chat get an idea, they don't let it go. Come on, Alex, do it for the content. Bro, don't be scared. What's the worst that could happen? Let's summon some ghosts tonight, boys. It was all harmless fun, right? Eventually, I caved. I thought, screw it. I'll buy a cheap Ouija board from Amazon, make it a joke stream, and maybe boost my subs while I'm at it. It sounded like easy content. Sounded like. Fast forward a few days. I scheduled the stream for 9 PM, the classic spooky hour, because if you're going to mess with fake ghost stuff, you might as well go all in on the atmosphere. I dimmed the lights in my room, set up some cheesy Halloween decorations, and had the board laid out on my desk. I even made sure to get some candles, really go for that seance vibe, you know? The kind of stuff that'd make my audience laugh. When the stream started, everything was normal. I had around 50 to 60 people watching, which was about average for a weekday night. We started chatting. People joked about what spirits I was going to talk to, and honestly, it was a lot of fun at first. I even made fun of myself for being nervous. I mean, it's just a board game, right? The planchette, the little thing that moves around, was still in the box. I unwrapped it live, showing everyone that it was brand new, no trickery or anything. But as I pulled it out, I felt weird. Like I wasn't scared, but the room just felt heavy, you know, like when you're waiting for bad news or when something's just off and you can't put your finger on it. But I brushed it off as nerves and kept going. Chat was going wild at this point. People were spamming messages like, "Ask if there are ghosts." "Dude, summon a demon, lol." "Bro, you're gonna regret this." I kept rolling with it, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. So I put my hands on the planchette and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened, of course. I was sliding the thing around myself, making dumb jokes like, "Oh wow, it's totally moving, guys. So spooky." The chat ate it up, but then things got weird, like really weird. About 10 minutes in, someone in the chat, someone I didn't recognize, posted a message that caught my eye. Their username was something like Watcher6, and they typed, "Don't ask questions you aren't ready to hear the answers to." Now look, I get trolls all the time. It's part of being on the internet. But this one stood out because, I kid you not, right after I read it, the candle closest to me flickered, like a full-on flicker, not just a little sputter, but like someone blew on it. But there was no draft in the room. My window was closed, the fan was off. So where did that breeze come from? The chat went insane when they noticed. "Did anyone else see that?" "Dude, your candle just flickered." Okay, now it's getting creepy. I laughed it off at first because, seriously, what else could I do? It was probably a coincidence. But then, the planchette moved. On its own. I swear to you, I didn't push it. My hands were barely resting on the thing, and it started sliding toward the yes on the board. My heart dropped, and I thought, okay, this is either the best prank I've ever played on myself, or something is seriously wrong. But chat was eating it up. People were spamming messages, going nuts. I could feel the adrenaline kicking in. It wasn't like I was scared and yet, more like I was excited, caught up in the moment. "Ask it something." "Bro, this is insane." Watcher 6 is sus, bro. And yeah, Watcher 6 was still in the chat, just lurking. They hadn't typed anything else, but I kept seeing their username pop up in the list of viewers. So, like an idiot, I decided to go with it. I asked, "Is there anyone in this room with me right now?" For a second, nothing happened, and then the planchette slid to the yes. It moved slowly, almost like it was unsure. At this point, I was laughing, but it was that nervous, I don't know what's happening, but I need to play this cool kind of laugh. My hands were shaking a bit, but I didn't let go. "Okay, who are you then?" The planchette started moving again, this time faster, more deliberate. It spelled out a name, Evelyn. Now, I don't know anyone named Evelyn. I even said that out loud like, I don't know an Evelyn. Is this a troll? But the planchette didn't stop. It kept spelling out more letters. HELP. That's when I froze. My hands were still on the board, but I wasn't moving it. And if this was some kind of elaborate prank, I didn't know how anyone could be pulling it off. "Help? What do you mean, help?" I asked, feeling the temperature in the room drop. And I don't mean that figuratively. I actually got goosebumps because it suddenly felt like the room had dropped 5 degrees. The planchette slid again, this time faster than before. It spelled out GETOUT. So, after the planchette spelled out, "Get out," I just sat there, staring at the board, completely frozen. The room was dead quiet, except for the low hum of my computer fans. My fingers were still lightly resting on the planchette, but I swear I wasn't moving it. It was like I didn't know what to do, laugh it off like it was some crazy coincidence, or just end the stream right there and delete everything. But here's the thing, I'm a streamer. I'm supposed to keep people entertained, right? So I nervously laughed again and tried to play it off, even though deep down I was freaking out. "All right, Evelyn," I said, trying to sound casual. "You want me to get out, huh? Well, this is my room, so good luck with that." The chat was going wild. People were spamming messages faster than I could read. Some were saying it was all fake. Others were genuinely freaked out. And then there was Watcher 6. They finally sent another message. "You shouldn't have asked that." I froze. The timing was way too perfect. I hadn't seen that username before tonight, and now they were saying all this cryptic stuff at just the right moments. It felt wrong, like they knew something I didn't. I clicked on their username to see if I could get any info, but their profile was basically blank. No followers, no activity, nothing. At this point, I figured it was probably just some troll trying to mess with me. But what really got me was that as soon as I clicked on their profile, the stream started glitching. The screen went all pixelated for a few seconds, and the audio cut out. It wasn't like a normal lag spike. This was different, like something was interfering with the feed itself. I didn't want to look like I was scared, so I tried to brush it off, but chat wasn't having it. "Yo, what just happened? Dude, your stream is glitching. I swear I saw something behind you, bro." Now, that comment caught me off guard. I quickly glanced at the little window where I could see my own camera feed. The candles were still flickering, but nothing seemed out of place. But then, one by one, people in the chat started typing the same thing. "There's something behind you. Turn around." I saw it too. I'll admit, my stomach dropped a little at that point. I've watched enough horror movies to know that when chat starts telling you there's something behind you, you don't turn around. I wasn't about to fall into that cliche. But the more I ignored it, the more persistent they got. "Turn around, Alex. It's standing right there. Dude, I'm serious. Look behind you." I was trying to keep it cool, but my heart was racing. There was nothing behind me. I knew that. I would have heard someone come in, or at least seen them. But when you've got 60 people all insisting that they see something you don't, it messes with your head. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around in my chair, expecting to see nothing but the usual. My bed, some posters, the open closet door. But when I looked, everything felt wrong. The shadows in the room looked darker, like they were too thick, too heavy. The candles on the desk flickered more violently than before, almost as if they were reacting to something I couldn't see. My closet door was open a crack, but I didn't remember leaving it like that. Still, there was no one there. No figure, no movement, nothing. I let out a shaky breath, trying to laugh it off again. "You guys are seriously freaking me out. There's nothing behind me. See?" I turned the camera a bit, giving chat a full view of the room. Just my normal, cluttered bedroom. I felt stupid for even looking. But then I saw it. A new message from Watcher 6. "You look too late." And that's when things went from weird to straight up terrifying. The closet door creaked. I jumped so hard I almost knocked over one of the candles. The sound was soft but unmistakable, like someone slowly, deliberately pushing the door open. I stared at it, waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to jump out, or for me to realize this was all some dumb prank I hadn't caught on to yet. But the door just hung there, barely open, not moving anymore. I could feel my chest tightening. I didn't want to go near it, but my curiosity was getting the better of me. Chat was still spamming messages, some telling me to check the closet, others saying to end the stream. I was torn. "Bro, seriously, end the stream. It's not worth it, man. Who's messing with your closet?" Against my better judgment, I stood up. The planchette on the board stayed completely still as I walked toward the closet. Every step felt heavier, like I was walking into something I couldn't come back from. When I got to the door, I reached out and pulled it open the rest of the way. Nothing. Just my clothes hanging there, some shoes on the floor. But there was this smell. I didn't notice it at first, but the closer I got, the stronger it became. It was faint, but definitely there, like something old and musty, mixed with the smell of wet earth. I closed the door quickly, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread crawling up my spine. "Okay, that was weird," I muttered. sitting back down in my chair. But there's nothing there. You guys can stop messing with me now. But the chat didn't stop. If anything, they seemed more freaked out than I was. And then, my camera feed cut out. Just black. At first, I thought it was another glitch, but I could still see the chat moving. I could hear the audio of my stream, the faint hum of my computer, the candles still flickering, but the video was gone. Suddenly, Watcher 6 sent another message. "It's in your room now." I felt my blood run cold. That's when I noticed something even worse. My microphone wasn't picking up the usual background noises anymore. The faint buzzing of my computer fan. Gone. The crackling of the candle. Silent. The only sound left was my own breathing, slow, shaky, and far too loud in the eerie stillness. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I was done playing along. This wasn't funny anymore. I reached for the mouse, ready to kill the stream and just call it a night, but then I saw something in the reflection of my monitor, a shape, dark, just barely visible behind me, like a shadow that didn't belong. Before I could turn around, the stream came back online, and all I saw in chat were 3 words, repeated over and over. "It's behind you." I've never moved so fast in my life. The second I saw that shadowy figure in the reflection, I spun around in my chair so hard I nearly fell over. But again, nothing. My room looked exactly the same as before. The candles flickered weakly, my bed was unmade, the closet door was now fully closed. No shadow, no figure, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. It wasn't just that eerie, skin-crawling sensation you get when you feel like you're being watched. It was deeper than that, like something was pressing down on me, suffocating the air out of the room. I quickly glanced back at the chat, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but it only made things worse. "Bro, it's still behind you. I swear I saw something move. Get out of there, now." I couldn't tell if they were trolling or if they were seeing something I couldn't, but the panic in the chat felt real. And then there was him again. Watcher 6. "Why didn't you listen?" The moment I read that, my screen flickered again, just for a second, but enough to make my heart leap into my throat. My hands were shaking as I reached for the mouse. I was done. I didn't care about content anymore. I didn't care about keeping people entertained. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was. But when I tried to end the stream, the button was greyed out. My computer had locked up. I tried clicking it again, but nothing. No response. The chat was still moving, frantic, panicked messages flooding the screen, but I couldn't do anything. Even my keyboard wasn't responding. Now, I'm not a tech expert or anything, but I've been streaming long enough to know my way around glitches. This wasn't one. This felt deliberate, like someone, or something, was keeping me from turning the stream off. The temperature in the room had dropped even more. I was starting to shiver, and I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. How was that even possible? The heat was on in my apartment. It wasn't that cold outside, but the air felt damp, heavy, like I'd stepped into a basement that hadn't been aired out in years. I tried again to shut everything down, Control-Alt-Delete, Task Manager, anything to kill the stream, but my screen froze completely. The image on the monitor was stuck on my webcam feed, showing me sitting there, pale and wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was off. The webcam feed wasn't showing me in real time anymore. The version of me on the screen wasn't moving, wasn't reacting. My hands were on the mouse, but on the stream, they were just resting in my lap. And then, slowly, the version of me on the screen turned its head. Not me. I was still frozen at my desk, staring at the monitor, but the version of me on the screen turned, ever so slowly, to look over its shoulder. And it smiled. Not a normal smile. This was something else. It stretched too wide, too unnatural, like someone who didn't quite know how to mimic human expression. It was grotesque, almost cartoonish in the way it curled upward, as if whatever was on the other side of that screen was enjoying itself a little too much. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My real body was still locked in place, hands gripping the edge of the desk, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. The chat was going ballistic. WTF is happening? Bro, that's not you. Dude, end the stream, please. And then, out of nowhere, the audio cut back in. But it wasn't my voice. It was something else entirely. A low, guttural whisper. So quiet at first that I almost thought I imagined it. But it was there, growing louder with each passing second. You invited me, it said, the voice crackling through the speakers like it was struggling to form words. I'm here now. I whipped around in my chair again, looking over my shoulder, but the room was still empty. I could feel it though. Something was here. It was like the air itself had turned malevolent, pressing in on me from every angle. I slammed my hand on the desk, desperate to snap myself out of whatever trance I was in. All right, that's enough. Whoever's messing with me, you win. I'm done. My voice cracked as I spoke, the fear creeping into every word. But there was no response. Not from chat, not from anyone. Just that low, humming buzz from my computer. The voice from the stream came again, louder this time. You asked for help. Now I'm helping. The words were slow, deliberate, as if the thing speaking was savoring every syllable. And then the image on the screen shifted. The version of me on the webcam feed stood up. I didn't move. I was still glued to my chair, terrified, but the thing on the screen stood up. It was taller now, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it was trying to figure out how to be me. It moved awkwardly, like a puppet on strings, each step jerky and wrong. But the worst part, its eyes, they were hollow, just empty, black pits staring directly at the camera, at me. My stomach dropped. It was mimicking me. Whatever it was, it had somehow latched onto my stream, my feed, and now it was replacing me, or trying to. I jumped up from my chair, knocking it over in the process, and bolted for the door. I didn't care about the stream anymore. I didn't care about what was happening on screen. I just needed to get out of that room. But when I grabbed the door handle, it wouldn't budge. I yanked on it, throwing my weight into the door, but it felt like it was welded shut. Panic set in. I turned back toward my desk, and that's when I saw it. The thing on the screen. It was right behind my chair now, standing there in the same position I had been. But this time, it wasn't smiling. Its mouth hung open in a wide, grotesque gash, and from inside that darkness, I could hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent. The room itself felt like it was closing in. The walls seemed closer, tighter, the shadows darker, and then Watcher 6 sent another message. It's not just in your room anymore, it's in theirs too. I froze, staring at the message, trying to process what it meant. Theirs? Who was theirs? And then it hit me. The viewers. I whipped around to look at the chat again, and sure enough, people were freaking out in ways that went beyond just trolling. Something's wrong in my house. I swear I heard footsteps. Dude, my lights just flickered. What the hell is going on? I felt sick. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just affecting me. It was spreading. Through the stream, through the viewers, and I had no way of stopping it. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, but underneath them I could hear something else, something wet and dragging, like footsteps approaching from just outside my room. The chat was going wild. It's coming for us. What did you do? Turn it off! Turn it off! But I couldn't. I couldn't turn it off. And then, the last message from Watcher 6 appeared on the screen clear as day. You opened the door. Now none of us can close it. The moment I saw that message from Watcher 6, it felt like my stomach had been ripped out. You opened the door. Now none of us can close it. The words hung there in the chat, like some kind of sick warning, but there was no time to process it. Everything was happening too fast. The dragging sound outside my room grew louder. I could hear it, clear as day, right outside my door now. Something heavy, slow, like wet footsteps dragging across the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest so hard I thought it might burst. My hand shot to the door handle again, yanking with all my strength, but it still wouldn't budge. It wasn't just locked, it felt like the air itself was thick and pressing against the door, keeping it shut. I backed away, my eyes darting to the monitor. The stream was still live, my camera showing an empty chair where I had been sitting, the candles still flickering weakly in the background. But in the reflection of the screen, that thing was still there, still standing behind my chair, watching, waiting. It hadn't moved, but its presence was enough to make my skin crawl. And then the chat started changing. It wasn't just the usual spam anymore. People were posting messages that made no sense, like they were panicking, but the words were jumbled, broken fragments of sentences, symbols, random characters. It was like the chat itself was breaking down. But then, in the middle of all that chaos, I noticed something else. Messages from people who weren't just watching. They were hearing things too. I swear to God, I just heard a knock on my door. Something's outside my window. My lights are flickering. What the hell is happening? I felt the blood drain from my face as I read those messages. This wasn't just affecting me anymore. Whatever this thing was, it was spreading through the stream, through the people watching. It had latched onto them like some kind of virus, and it wasn't letting go. The whispers were back, louder now, and this time they were coming from inside the room. They were surrounding me, closing in from all sides, but there was nothing there. Just those voices, low and guttural, speaking in some language I couldn't understand. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the fallen chair, my mind racing. I had to shut this down. I had to stop whatever was happening before it got worse. I reached for the power button on my PC, desperate to kill the stream, but the second my finger touched it, the room plunged into complete darkness. The candles blew out all at once. My monitor shut off. Total, suffocating silence filled the room. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I almost didn't hear the knock. Knock, knock. It was faint, almost polite, like someone gently tapping on the door. For a split second I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the echo of the whispers still ringing in my head. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time, deliberate. Like someone, or something, was waiting for me to answer. I backed up until I hit the wall, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The door was still shut, but I could hear it. Right on the other side. Whatever it was waiting, like it knew I was trapped. The air in the room felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth, and my chest was tight, like something was squeezing the life out of me. The monitor flickered back on, dimly illuminating the room in that cold blue light. The stream was still running. Somehow, the camera was back on me now, but the image was distorted, flickering with static. Chat was still blowing up, but most of the messages were unreadable now. Just random symbols, distorted letters, and glitchy fragments of sentences. But in between all the chaos, there was one clear message from Watcher 6. Don't open it. I stared at those 3 words, my body frozen with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. And then the knocking came again. This time it wasn't polite. It was loud, insistent, like someone was slamming their fist against the door. Bang! 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 I flinched, pressing myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. My mind was racing, screaming at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare that I had somehow unleashed. The door rattled with each bang, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. Bang, bang, bang! The chat exploded again, with messages that made my stomach churn. It's at my door too. I can hear it outside. What do I do? I'm scared. It wasn't just me. It was happening to everyone who was watching. That thing, whatever it was, had reached through the screen and into their homes, their lives, and I had no idea how to stop it. Suddenly, the screen on my monitor glitched. the webcam feed flickering violently. I watched, horrified, as the distorted version of me appeared again, standing in the center of the screen, staring directly at the camera. But this time, it wasn't smiling. Its hollow eyes bored into mine, and I could feel something pulling at me, dragging me toward the screen like a magnet. I turned away, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to block it out. But I couldn't. The whispers were still there, crawling into my ears, into my mind. They were louder now, more insistent, like they were demanding something from me, something I didn't understand. And then, through the static, I heard the voice again. "You invited me. Let me in." I opened my eyes, my hands shaking, and saw that the figure on the screen had moved closer. It was right up against the camera now, its face pressed to the lens, its mouth twisted into that grotesque, unnatural grin. And behind it, I could see the faint outline of something else. Something dark, with too many limbs, moving in the shadows. The chat was still scrolling by, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. All I could see was that thing on the screen, staring at me, waiting. The door rattled again, louder this time, and I knew that whatever was out there was the same thing that was on the screen. It had come for me, and it wasn't going to stop until I let it in. I was trapped, the walls closing in, the air too thick to breathe. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and then the knocking stopped. For a second, I thought maybe it had gone away. Maybe it had given up. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching. And then, from somewhere deep within the static, I heard it again, so faint, so quiet, but unmistakable. "I'm already inside." The moment those words echoed through the static, "I'm already inside," everything fell silent. The knocking stopped. The whispers stopped. Even the faint hum of my computer disappeared. The silence was so complete, so thick, it felt like the world itself had been muted, leaving only the rapid thudding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I stood there, my back pressed against the wall, frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. The room was completely still, the shadows around me almost suffocating in their depth. The monitor flickered again, but this time, the image on the screen wasn't moving. The distorted version of me had vanished. Instead, the screen was just a black, empty void, pulsing with static, as if it were breathing. I glanced at the chat, hoping for some kind of answer, but it was no help. The messages had devolved into chaos. Random symbols, distorted text, and fragments of desperate pleas for help filled the screen, as if everyone watching was experiencing the same nightmare I was trapped in. I heard footsteps. Something touched my shoulder. My door just opened on its own. "What did you do, man? What did you do?" I wanted to scream, to tell them that I didn't know, that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But what could I even say? I couldn't explain it. I couldn't fix it. And I was running out of time. The air in the room felt colder, thicker. I could barely breathe. It was like the walls themselves were closing in, squeezing the life out of me. I had to get out. I had to end this somehow. But how? Nothing was working. My computer was useless. The door was sealed shut. And whatever was in here with me, it wasn't going to just let me leave. Then, out of nowhere, the voice came again, clearer than ever before. "You let me in. You can't leave now." I felt my whole body go rigid. It wasn't coming from the monitor this time. It was coming from inside the room. It was close. Too close. I slowly turned, my eyes scanning the darkened room, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the flickering shadows and the faint glow of the candles that had somehow reignited on their own. The closet door was shut, the bed untouched, the corners of the room still cloaked in that impenetrable darkness. But I knew it was there. I could feel it. the weight of its presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. My eyes darted back to the monitor. The screen was still pulsing, but something had changed. The black void was shifting, warping, like something was moving beneath the surface. And then, slowly, a shape began to emerge from the static. At first, it was just a dark outline, but as it drew closer, the shape became clearer, too clear. It was me. No, not me, not exactly. It was that thing, the distorted version of me. Its hollow eyes stared out from the screen, the same grotesque, twisted smile plastered across its face. But this time, it wasn't just staring. It was moving, crawling. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as the figure slowly reached out of the monitor. Its hand, if you could even call it that, stretched impossibly long, fingers twisting and curling like tendrils, reaching toward the edge of the screen. I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. I was trapped, helpless, as the thing pulled itself further out of the screen. Its head was the next to emerge, twisting unnaturally as it squeezed through the static, its hollow eyes never leaving mine. And then, with one sickening lurch, it stepped out of the monitor entirely. It stood there, towering over me, its body barely human anymore. Its limbs were too long, its movements too jagged, like it didn't fully understand how to inhabit this world. The static from the monitor crackled behind it, distorting its form, but the grin on its face never wavered. I backed up, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The walls seemed to close in even tighter, trapping me in the room with this thing. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The thing took a step forward, its body creaking like old wood bending under pressure. The air around it seemed to warp, pulsing with that same oppressive energy I had felt since the stream had started. And then it spoke again. But this time, it wasn't the whisper from the screen. It was my voice. "Don't you see?" it said, its voice perfectly mimicking mine, though warped and hollow. "You are me now, and I am you." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My head was spinning, my vision blurring. I could hear the chat going wild in the background, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. All I could see was that twisted version of myself, standing there, waiting. It didn't move again. It didn't need to. The terror it radiated was enough to keep me pinned in place. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fight this thing. I couldn't touch it, couldn't stop it. And as I stood there, frozen, I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't just trapped in this room. I was trapped in it. The thing took another step closer, its long, twisted fingers reaching out for me. The cold air around it seemed to pull me in, dragging me toward the void that had spilled from the monitor. And as I looked into those hollow eyes, I understood what Watcher 6 had meant. This was the door we had opened. It wasn't a ghost or a demon. It wasn't some spirit trying to communicate. It was something much worse, something ancient, something hungry. It had used the Ouija board as a gateway, and now it was feeding, not just on me, but on everyone who had watched, everyone who had been pulled into its trap. The chat was still going crazy, but I couldn't even make out the messages anymore. They were just a blur of letters and symbols, as if the connection itself was breaking down, corrupted by whatever this thing was. And then, with one final deliberate movement, the thing reached for me, its hand closing around my wrist. The moment it touched me, everything went cold, ice cold. I could feel my body shutting down, my mind unraveling, as if I was being pulled out of myself, consumed by that same void that had crawled out of the screen. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the chat. One final message from Watcher 6. "You're one of us now." And then silence. It's been 3 days since the stream. I'm still here, I think. But something's different. The thing that came out of the monitor, it's gone now. At least, I think it is. I haven't seen it since that night. But sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something. just for a second. A shadow that doesn't quite belong. A smile that's a little too wide. And the worst part? The chat hasn't stopped. Even when I'm not streaming, even when my computer is off, I can hear it. Whispers, faint and distant, like the viewers are still watching, still waiting. And I know, deep down, that whatever door we opened that night, it's still open. I'm not sure if I'm still me, or if I'm just part of it now. And if you were watching that stream, I'm sorry, because it's coming for you next. The Ouija board gave us coordinates. We shouldn't have gone there. Okay, so let me start by saying I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or any of that paranormal stuff. I mean, yeah, I grew up watching the usual horror movies and hearing spooky stories around the campfire. But it was all just entertainment to me. None of it was real. You know the type of kid who thought he was invincible? That was me. But what happened a few weeks ago? Yeah, I'm still not sure how to explain it. I'm not even sure I want to. It all started when my friends and I were hanging out at my buddy Jake's place. It was a regular Friday night, nothing out of the ordinary. There were 5 of us, me, Jake, his girlfriend Katie, and our 2 other friends, Ben and Lily. We had pizza, some beers, and were scrolling through Netflix for something decent to watch. The vibe was pretty chill, but you know how it goes with these hangouts. Someone always wants to do something more exciting. Katie, who's into all that witchy crystal stuff, started talking about this Ouija board she'd bought off eBay. Apparently, it was an authentic one, whatever that means. It didn't look any different from the ones you can buy at Target, but Katie swore up and down that it was legit. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've all heard those don't mess with Ouija board stories, right? But again, I didn't believe in that kind of stuff. None of us did. So, when Katie pulled the board out and asked if we wanted to try it, we were all like, why not? We thought it'd be a laugh, something spooky to break up the usual pizza and movie routine. We dimmed the lights, because you have to when you're doing a Ouija board, right? And set it up on the coffee table. Katie explained the rules like she was running a legit séance, which cracked us up at first. No one was taking it seriously. I even made a joke like, so when's Casper showing up? Ben chuckled, but Katie shot me a look, and I dropped it. We all put our fingers on the planchette, and to be honest, I expected nothing to happen. At first I was right. We asked the typical dumb questions like, is there anyone here with us? And give us a sign. Nothing. The planchette just sat there, not even a twitch. After about 10 minutes of goofing off, I was ready to call it quits. That's when it started to move. At first, I thought it was Katie, or maybe Jake trying to mess with us. The thing slid across the board in slow, jerky motions, spelling out random letters. B, E, T, H. Lily leaned in, squinting at the board. Who's Beth? No one knew a Beth, but the planchette kept moving. S, T, O, P. Stop what? Ben asked, sounding a little nervous now. I could feel the energy in the room shift. Suddenly, it wasn't funny anymore. We all looked at each other, silently daring someone to pull their finger off the planchette first. But none of us did. I think we were all starting to feel it, the weird, heavy tension in the air. The board felt different, like it wasn't just a game anymore. Katie asked another question, her voice a little shaky. What do you want? The planchette shot to the word yes, then immediately spelled out something I'll never forget. It was fast this time, like whoever, or whatever, was moving. It was getting impatient. C, O, O, R, D, I, N, A, T, E, S coordinates. We all froze. I think my heart skipped a beat. What the hell? Jake muttered. The planchette didn't stop there. It kept moving, sliding around the board in rapid movements, as if it couldn't get the message out fast enough. We watched in silence as it spelled out a string of numbers. Katie grabbed her phone and typed them in. They're coordinates, like actual coordinates. It's pointing to a place. Ben snorted, trying to shake off the unease. It's probably just some random spot in the middle of nowhere. But it wasn't. When Katie pulled up the map, the room went dead quiet. The coordinates led to a forest about 2 hours away from us, someplace none of us had ever been or even heard of. A red pin glowed on the screen, sitting in the middle of nothing. No towns, no houses, just miles and miles of trees. That's creepy as hell, Lily whispered. We all sat there, staring at the map on Katie's phone. The air felt thick, and no one was laughing anymore. It felt like something was watching us, waiting. Jake broke the silence. We should go. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. His face was dead serious. Come on, man. It's probably just a coincidence. Let's just check it out. What's the worst that could happen? If I knew then what I know now, I'd have walked out of that house right then and never looked back. But of course I didn't. None of us did. We all agreed to go, and that was our first mistake. So the plan was to go the next morning. Jake was weirdly enthusiastic about the whole thing, like he'd found some treasure map or something. I didn't sleep much that night. None of us did. There was this unspoken tension between us, like we all knew something was off but didn't want to admit it. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, just thinking about those coordinates. The weird way the planchette had moved, spelling it out like someone, or something, was watching us. By morning, it still seemed like a bad idea, but Jake had already texted the group, and no one wanted to back out and be the chicken who ruined the adventure. I figured, worst case scenario, we'd drive out, find nothing but trees, and turn around. No harm done. I threw on a hoodie and packed a backpack with a few essentials: water, snacks, flashlight, just in case. Jake had an old Jeep that was perfect for off-roading, so we piled in. Me, Jake, Katie, Ben, and Lily. The vibe was awkwardly quiet at first, just the sound of the road under the tyres and Jake's bad playlist blasting in the background. No one really talked about the Ouija board or the coordinates. It was like we were all trying to convince ourselves this was just a regular road trip. About an hour into the drive, things started to get weird. I don't mean paranormal weird, but that unsettling, gut-feeling weird where something just doesn't feel right. We took this long, winding road that seemed like it went nowhere. The trees on either side of us got denser the further we drove, blocking out most of the sunlight. You know how you can feel when you're in the middle of nowhere? That's what it felt like civilization was way behind us, and we were headed straight into the unknown. The GPS was still tracking the coordinates Katie had punched in, but the deeper we got, the sketchier it looked. The road turned from gravel to dirt, and eventually, we were just driving through mud. The trees felt like they were closing in on us, like they were leaning over the Jeep, watching. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see, I don't know, something or someone following us, but it was just empty forest stretching out behind us. Finally, the GPS announced that we were arriving at our destination. The pin was just sitting there, in the middle of nowhere, like it was marking the heart of the forest. Jake pulled the Jeep to a stop, and we all just sat there for a minute, staring out at the trees. "We're really doing this?" Lily asked, her voice small. Jake grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "Come on, don't back out now." I could tell no one really wanted to get out of the car, but again, no one wanted to be the one who chickened out. So, one by one, we climbed out of the Jeep and grabbed our stuff. The air outside was thick and still, like the world was holding its breath. There were no sounds, no birds, no rustling leaves, just dead silence. Katie led the way, holding her phone out in front of her, trying to get a signal to keep us on track. The coordinates led us deeper into the woods. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches hanging low like old, bony fingers. The further we walked, the worse the feeling in my stomach got. It wasn't just the creepiness of the woods. It was something else, like we were intruding on a place we weren't supposed to be. After about 20 minutes of walking, we reached a small clearing. It didn't look like anything special, just a patch of dirt surrounded by trees, but something about it felt wrong. The air felt colder, heavier, like the place had been waiting for us. Katie stopped in the middle of the clearing, looking down at her phone. This is it. The coordinates end here. I looked around, but there was nothing. No landmarks, no signs of anything unusual. Just trees and dirt. I was about to say we should turn back when Ben, who had been walking around the perimeter of the clearing, called out, "Hey guys, check this out." We all walked over to where Ben was standing, and that's when I saw it. In the middle of the dirt, partially covered by leaves and debris, was an old stone well. The thing looked ancient, like it had been sitting there, forgotten for centuries. The stone was cracked and covered in moss, and the well itself was just a dark, gaping hole in the ground. No rope, no bucket, just a yawning black abyss. Lily took a step back. "Okay, this is getting too creepy. Can we go now?" Jake, of course, was fascinated. He knelt down and peered into the well. "How deep do you think it goes?" I don't know what it was about that well, but the longer I looked at it, the more wrong it felt. Like it wasn't just a hole in the ground, but something more dangerous. It felt like it was watching us, like the well was alive, almost. I know how crazy that sounds, but standing there, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was waiting for us to make the wrong move. Katie broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "Guys, I don't like this." That's when we heard it. We didn't answer. What could we even say? None of this made any sense. The scream, the hand, or whatever it was, the feeling of cold creeping into my skin. It all felt like a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. Katie knelt beside Ben, trying to steady him. His leg had deep red marks around his ankle, where that thing had grabbed him. They looked like handprints, but distorted, like something not quite human had left them. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart was still racing, my pulse loud in my ears. No one argued. We helped Ben to his feet and started moving, quickly, back toward the direction of the jeep. The forest was closing in around us, the trees casting long, dark shadows that seemed to stretch toward us. Every rustle, every crack of a twig made us jump. It felt like we were being watched again, but this time, it was worse. The air was thick with dread, like we were intruding on something we couldn't even begin to understand. We walked faster, practically jogging now, the jeep still nowhere in sight. It felt like we had been walking forever, even though the trip to the clearing had only taken 20 minutes. My legs were burning, and every breath felt shallow. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting that thing to come crawling out of the well, chasing after us. But nothing came, just the sound of our footsteps, the distant rustling of leaves. And then, the smell. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then Katie wrinkled her nose and looked at me, her face pale. Do you smell that?" I nodded. It was faint, but unmistakable. The stench of decay, like something had been rotting out in the woods for far too long. It was thick in the air now, mixing with the cold, damp smell of the forest. I could taste it on the back of my tongue, making me gag. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, his voice strained. "Come on, the jeep can't be that far." But the stench kept getting stronger. Every step we took, it seemed to follow us, clinging to the air like something foul was trailing just behind us. I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. Then Lily, who had been walking behind us, stopped dead in her tracks. "Guys, look." We all turned around, and that's when we saw them. Hanging from the trees, just beyond the path we were walking on, were dozens of things. They looked like figures, wrapped in old, rotting cloth. Their limbs were twisted, dangling from the branches, their faces hidden beneath layers of decaying fabric. Some of them swayed gently in the breeze, their bodies creaking as they hung there. lifeless. Katie covered her mouth, fighting back a scream. What? What the hell is that? No one answered. We didn't need to. Those weren't just cloths hanging from the trees. They were bodies. For a long, awful moment, none of us moved. We just stood there, staring at the hanging bodies swaying gently in the trees. My brain was struggling to process what I was seeing, and my chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. The smell of rot was overwhelming now, so thick I thought I might vomit. The bodies. They weren't fresh, but they weren't skeletons either. They were somewhere in between, decayed but still recognizable as people. Their faces, or what was left of them, were covered in layers of old, disintegrating cloth. Some of the bodies were missing limbs. Others had deep gouges in their torsos, as if something had been tearing into them. Who did this? Lily whispered, her voice trembling. No one answered. We couldn't. I wanted to run, to turn around and sprint back to the jeep, but it felt like the woods had closed in on us, trapping us in this nightmare. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of death and something else, something older, more ancient, like the forest itself was alive, watching us. We have to go, Katie whispered. Her voice was shaky, but there was a sharpness in it. She wasn't asking anymore. She was telling us. I nodded, but my legs felt like lead. It was like every step forward was taking me deeper into something I didn't want to understand. I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting one of the bodies to move, to reach out and grab us. Jake took a few cautious steps forward, pulling Ben along with him. Come on, we need to get the hell out of here. We all followed, our eyes still glued to the grotesque figures hanging in the branches. As we passed beneath them, the smell became unbearable. It was inescapable, like the air was filled with the weight of their decay, pressing down on us, suffocating us. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but as we walked, I realized something was watching us from the trees. In between the twisted, gnarled branches, there were eyes, dozens of them. They weren't human either, too large, too glossy. They glistened in the dim light, reflecting our movements, a sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. It was coming from the well, deep, deep down. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe water dripping from somewhere, but then it got louder, and I realized it wasn't water. It was a voice, a soft, distorted whisper, rising up from the depths of the well. Ben's face went pale. Did you guys hear that? We all nodded, frozen in place, our eyes locked on the well. The voice was clearer now, like it was calling out to us, but the words were impossible to understand. It wasn't English or any language I'd ever heard before, just this eerie, guttural sound echoing up from the darkness. Jake stood up, his face pale, but he tried to play it cool. It's probably just an echo or something. Katie shook her head, backing away from the well. We need to leave. Now. But before we could, the voice changed. It was no longer a whisper. It was a scream, a blood-curdling human scream, tearing through the silence of the woods. And it was coming from the bottom of the well. I've never heard a scream like that before. Not in real life. You know how in horror movies, the screams always feel a little off, like the actors are trying too hard? This wasn't like that. This was raw, primal terror, echoing up from the well and rattling inside my skull. None of us moved. We just stood there, rooted to the spot, our hearts pounding in sync with that awful sound. It was like the scream had paralyzed us. My brain was telling me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet wouldn't budge. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the scream cut off. Complete silence fell over the clearing again, and that might have been worse. You ever feel like the air itself is pressing down on you, thick and suffocating? That's exactly how it felt, like whatever had been screaming wasn't done with us yet. I finally managed to speak. We need to go. Now. Jake, still trying to be the tough guy, looked down at the well again, his hands on his hips. It's probably just... No, Katie snapped, grabbing his arm. We're leaving. Something's wrong. We shouldn't be here. Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but he saw the panic in Katie's eyes and shut his mouth. Ben and Lily were already backing away from the well, their eyes darting around like they expected something to jump out of the trees at any second. We all turned to leave the clearing, but just as we started walking, there was a loud crack from behind us. I whipped around and saw the stones around the well shaking, like something was moving inside. The moss-covered rocks started crumbling, breaking off in chunks and falling into the black pit below. What the hell? Ben muttered, stepping closer despite every instinct telling him not to. Don't! Lily hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. But Ben was already too close. He stood there, staring into the well as the stones continued to shift and tremble. And then, with a sickening grind, the stones stopped. Everything went still. Dead still. For a moment, none of us moved. I was about to tell Ben to step away when something reached up. It happened so fast, I almost didn't process it. A hand, no, not a hand, something like a hand, shot out from the darkness of the well and latched onto Ben's leg. It was pale, almost translucent, with long, thin fingers that wrapped around his ankle like a vice. I didn't even have time to yell before Ben screamed and hit the ground, his body being dragged toward the well. Ben! Lily screamed, rushing toward him, but Jake grabbed her before she could get too close. Ben's eyes were wild, his nails clawing at the dirt as he was pulled closer to the well, inch by inch. That thing had a grip on him, dragging him toward the pit. I swear, I've never seen anyone look that terrified before. He was screaming, his voice hoarse, begging for us to help him. Without thinking, I ran over and grabbed his arm. The moment my hand touched him, it felt like ice was crawling up my skin. My fingers felt numb, like something was sapping the warmth out of them. I yanked as hard as I could, but whatever was holding him was stronger, much stronger. Katie grabbed onto Ben's other arm, pulling with all her might. Jake and Lily were screaming, telling us to let go, but there was no way I was letting Ben get pulled into that well. Not without a fight. My feet slid in the dirt as I struggled to hold on. And then, just as suddenly as it had grabbed him, the thing let go. Ben collapsed into my arms, gasping and shaking, his face as pale as a ghost. The rest of us stood there in stunned silence, staring at the well, waiting for whatever that was to come back. But the stones were still again, the well dark and silent like before. I don't, Ben stammered, his voice shaking. I don't know what the hell was that? Following us silently as we walked. The longer I stared at them, the more I realized they weren't random. They were waiting. Do you guys see that? I asked, my voice low, trying not to draw attention to us. Jake stopped and glanced around, his face pale. See what? The eyes, I whispered, pointing toward the trees. In the branches. Look closer. Katie turned, squinting, and then her face went white. Oh my God! They were all over the place now. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them, all watching from the shadows of the trees, blending into the bark and leaves. There was no sound, no movement, just the eyes, staring, waiting. My skin crawled, and my heart raced, pounding in my chest like a drum. What the hell are those? Ben asked, his voice cracking. We need to move, Katie said again, this time more urgently. We started walking faster, not quite running but close enough. The eyes stayed with us, watching from every angle, their presence pressing down on us like a weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, pushed toward something we didn't want to find. Then we heard it. A low, guttural growl. Not from any animal I recognized, but something deeper, more primal. It vibrated through the trees, making the ground beneath us feel unsteady. It wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. Katie grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him forward. We have to hurry. We broke into a run. The forest blurred around us, the branches whipping at our faces and arms as we sprinted through the underbrush. The path to the jeep felt longer now, like the forest itself was stretching, twisting, trying to trap us inside. Every breath burned in my lungs, and the smell of decay still clung to the air, thick and choking. Behind us, the growl echoed again, louder this time, closer. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw something moving through the trees, something big, its dark form blending with the shadows. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was fast, darting between the trunks like it was hunting us. "Run!" Jake shouted, pulling Ben along as he stumbled. I didn't need to be told twice. We tore through the forest, our footsteps pounding the earth, the weight of the air pressing down harder the faster we moved. The jeep was still nowhere in sight, but I knew we couldn't stop. Not now, not with that thing behind us. The growl came again, closer, this time joined by a second one. Whatever was following us, there was more than one. I could hear them, their massive bodies crashing through the trees, closing in on us. Katie let out a small scream, stumbling as she tried to keep pace. Jake grabbed her before she fell, pulling her along with a strength I didn't know he had. The fear was driving us now, pure, unfiltered terror. Finally, through the trees, I saw it, the jeep. It was still parked where we left it, but it looked so far away, like we'd never make it in time. "Come on," Jake yelled, his voice hoarse. We pushed ourselves harder, our legs burning as we sprinted the last stretch. The creatures were right behind us now. I could hear their breath, ragged and wet, as they crashed through the underbrush. One of them let out another guttural roar, and I felt a blast of cold air at my back, as if it was reaching for me. We reached the jeep in a mad scramble. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, while the rest of us piled inside. I could barely catch my breath, my chest heaving as I slammed the door behind me. Ben and Lily were in the back, their faces pale, eyes wide with panic. "Hurry, man!" I shouted, glancing out the window, expecting to see those eyes closing in on us. Jake finally got the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. He slammed his foot on the gas, and the jeep lurched forward, kicking up dirt as we sped down the path. My heart was still pounding, the adrenaline still racing through my veins as we tore through the forest. For a moment, I thought we'd made it, that we'd left whatever was in those woods behind. But then, as we rounded a corner, something slammed into the side of the jeep. The whole vehicle shook, metal groaning under the impact. Jake swore, gripping the steering wheel as the jeep skidded sideways, nearly crashing into a tree. I caught a glimpse of something massive, dark, and fast out of the corner of my eye, something with long, twisted limbs, too many to count. It was right beside us, keeping pace with the jeep. "Floor it!" Katie screamed. Jake did. The jeep shot forward, and the thing fell behind us, its form disappearing into the shadows of the trees. The growls faded, and soon all we could hear was the roar of the engine and our own ragged breathing. We didn't stop driving until we hit the highway. No one spoke. No one even looked at each other. We were too shaken, too horrified by what we'd just experienced. But as we drove away from the forest, something gnawed at the back of my mind. The eyes, the bodies hanging in the trees, that thing that chased us. It all felt like a warning, and as I sat there, staring out the window, watching the trees fade into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't escaped at all, that whatever we had disturbed was still with us. The ride home was dead silent. We were all too shaken to talk, and every time I looked at my friends, I could see the same thing in their eyes. Fear. But not just the kind of fear you feel in the moment. No, this was different. This was the kind of fear that lingers, that sticks to your bones long after the danger's past. Jake kept his hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Katie sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her face pale. Ben and Lily were in the back, huddled together, still shaking. I sat next to them, my mind racing, replaying everything that had happened in those woods. None of it made sense. The bodies, the eyes, the thing that chased us. And the well. I kept thinking about the well. What was it about that place? Why did it feel like it was pulling us in, like it had been waiting for us? As the miles between us and the forest grew, I started to feel a little better, like the suffocating weight was lifting. But even then, something didn't sit right. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't really left that place behind. It felt like we'd crossed some invisible line back there. And now there was no going back. We pulled into Jake's driveway just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was a bruised shade of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the street. The world seemed almost too normal, too peaceful. It felt wrong after everything we'd just been through. None of us said anything as we got out of the Jeep. I think we were all still in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Jake turned off the engine and got out, but before he could head inside, Ben spoke up. "Hey, do you guys feel off?" We all turned to him. He was standing by the Jeep, looking down at his ankle, the same one that had been grabbed by that thing in the well. The skin around it was bruised, dark and purple, but it wasn't just the bruises that bothered me. There were marks, deep red grooves etched into his skin, like whatever had grabbed him had left its mark, something permanent. "I thought it was just, an injury," Ben continued, his voice shaky. "But it's been burning ever since, and it's spreading." I took a step closer and saw that he was right. The bruises were creeping up his leg, like veins of rot crawling through his skin. Katie gasped and backed away, her hand over her mouth. "Dude, that's not normal," Jake said, his voice low. Lily looked like she was about to cry. "We need to get him to a hospital." Ben shook his head. No, it's not that. I don't think a hospital can help." There was something in his voice that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just fear, it was resignation, like he knew something we didn't. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him he was just freaking himself out, but before I could say anything, he pulled up the sleeve of his shirt. And that's when we all saw it. The marks weren't just on his ankle anymore. They were on his arm too, deep, jagged lines snaking up from his wrist, weaving under his skin. It looked like they were moving, like something was crawling inside him, spreading. "Oh my God," Katie whispered, taking another step back. "What the hell is happening to me?" Ben asked, his voice barely a whisper. No one answered. We couldn't, because deep down, we all knew. This wasn't something that could be explained. It wasn't something that could be fixed. Whatever had grabbed Ben in that well, it had done more than just leave a bruise. It had marked him, claimed him. I wanted to scream, to tell him we had to do something, but I didn't know what, and I could see the same panic in everyone else's eyes. We were way out of our depth. "We need to go back," Ben said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "We need to go back to the well." "No," Lily snapped, shaking her head violently. "No way. We're not going back there." Ben looked desperate now, his eyes wild. "You don't get it. This thing, it's inside me. It's in all of us. I can feel it. The longer we stay away, the worse it gets." "What are you talking about?" Jake asked, his voice unsteady. "The eyes," Ben whispered, glancing at the darkening sky. "The bodies, the well, it's all connected. We didn't leave that place. It followed us. It's in us." I took a step back, my heart racing. "Ben, you're not making any sense." But the truth was, I knew exactly what he was talking about. I'd felt it too, that creeping sensation, like something was watching us, even now. The smell of rot still lingered in my nostrils, even though we were miles away from the forest. I thought it was just in my head, but looking at Ben now, I wasn't so sure. Katie was the first to break. "We're not going back," she said firmly. "We barely made it out of there alive the first time. I'm not going back to that place." Ben's face twisted with frustration, but he didn't argue. Instead, he looked at all of us, one by one. his eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also something worse. Acceptance. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I'll go alone." Lily grabbed his arm, her voice desperate. "Ben, no, you can't." But Ben just shook his head. "I don't have a choice. It's the only way." Before any of us could stop him, he turned and started walking. Slowly at first, then faster, disappearing down the street without another word. We didn't go after him. We couldn't, because the truth was, we were all too scared to face whatever was waiting back there, whatever was still inside us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Ben, about the marks on his skin, crawling up his arm. And worse, I kept thinking about the well. I could still hear that scream echoing in my head, that horrible, distorted voice rising up from the darkness. The next morning, we tried to call Ben. No answer. We drove by his house. His car was gone. By the third day, we realized we weren't going to hear from him again. It's been a few weeks since then. I've tried to move on, to convince myself that it's over, but I can't. I haven't spoken to Jake or Katie since that night, and Lily won't even answer my texts. But the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, is that I can still feel it. That creeping sensation under my skin, like something's crawling just below the surface. And every now and then, when I'm alone in my room, I see them. The eyes, watching me, waiting.